This story is called Inheritance. It's a story about Reconstruction. Once, just outside of a small town, there lived a widow and her 3 sons. They lived in a large and beautiful, but very, very old house. It was big enough for all of them, and so they lived happily together for many years. When the widow finally died, she left the house to her sons in equal shares in her will. The 3 men grew up and added families, and the families lived together in the old house for many years, until tragedy struck again. An enormous storm struck the town, lashing with driving rain, vicious winds, and lightning. The old house had been rotting inside through its timbers for many years, and this awesome storm was too much for it. The house was destroyed. The men and their families got out safely, but the house itself was shattered and scattered across its old site. The men were devastated, but after they had recovered, they vowed to rebuild the family home as it had been before. But they had different ideas about what it meant to rebuild. The oldest son was the first to begin. He went directly to the old site as soon as it was safe to do so, and began carting away every big piece of the old house that he could get his hands on, anything that looked useful: doors, window frames, furnishings, curtains, photographs, especially pictures of the old house in its prime. He referred to these as he began to build his new house, making sure that every detail matched up with the old pictures. When he didn't have materials, he went back to antique dealers to try to get items that were of the same age and of the same type. And when that wasn't possible, he went to the manufacturers of those materials and had them make new ones as closely as possible to the old. Now, there were some manufacturers he couldn't find again, and so he was forced to buy a few new materials, but with the others as a guide, he was able to match things very closely. His work proceeded quickly, and the eldest son chose a different spot outside of the old house and built as fast as he could. The middle son was a little slower, and he came to the site after the first had started. He was upset that his older brother had taken all of the big pieces and recognizable furnishings, but he decided that he would take the rest, all the debris that was left. He had it swept and gathered up and carted away to another site, not far from the old house, but different. There he began his work, more slowly and carefully. Now he spoke to the older brother and made reference to those pictures that had been saved. He also made reference to his own memories of what the house had looked like. And because he was working more slowly, he hit upon a clever idea. He went back to the town's courthouse and found that the blueprints for the house had been placed on file when it was first built. Taking a copy of these plans, the second son was able to begin building a house structurally exactly the same as the first. Now, the antiques were gone, but he could still go to the original manufacturers and get materials that were much like the originals. His house began to rise slowly but carefully, and it was almost exactly like the original in appearance. Even better, as new materials were made, he had the old materials recycled and reclaimed, so that there was no part of the new house that did not contain pieces of the old. The 2 brothers met regularly to discuss how their work was progressing and to check about details that they weren't sure about. They had conversations that went like, I think that pane actually had 6 frames. No, it was 4. Wait, didn't the stairs up to the front porch? There were 11 stairs. No, it was 12, I'm sure. I think the exterior was more of an eggshell. No, you're mad. It was oatmeal. Now, they fought, but they were still friends, especially since they knew that each of them was just trying to build the same house they had once lived in. They were doing their best. The third son and the youngest brother was the last to get started. When he got to the site, it had been swept clean, every piece of the old house taken away, except for the foundation, which was still there, as strong and as solid as before, unharmed by the storm. So, the third son decided he would build his house on that same site. Now, there were no materials available from the original house. The manufacturers who had made those materials were exhausted from supplying the first two. And so the youngest son decided that he would not try to rebuild exactly the old house. He would build a new house with new materials and new appliances and new techniques. He did refer to his own memories to try to match it as best he could. He talked to the old neighbors to get their memories of what the old house had looked like. But he also thought about what it had felt like to live in that house. That the joy and the comfort and the togetherness that it had created among them. He wanted to try to capture that. Not only that, but how the house might have felt when it was brand new, when it was first moved into with pride. The third son worked slowly and steadily and carefully. Finally, after several months, the three brothers had finished their work, and they met to tour their houses and to discuss how things had gone. The first son showed off his house and said, "I think you should both move in with me. I've built our family home. Exactly. Look, it looks exactly the same in every particular. I can show you the pictures to prove it, if you don't remember for yourself. Look, that's the same front door, the same boards, the same color, the same orientation. Half of the boards in this house are the same as were in the original house, even in the same locations. And you know, when I couldn't get the same materials, I went to antique dealers and got something exactly like it. When I couldn't get those, I went to the manufacturers who made the original parts and got an exact match in modern materials. It's the same house. I have rebuilt our family house. You should come and live with me." The second brother nodded, but disagreed. They walked on to his house, and he showed them around and said, "Well, it doesn't look precisely like the old house, but you have to admit it's pretty close. Even better, it's structurally the same as the old house. I referred to the original plans, the thickness of the windows, the angle of the joins, even the plants used in the landscaping outside, all the same. And I went to the original manufacturers myself, same as you. If I couldn't find those manufacturers, I found the companies that had bought their old inventory, and I purchased from them. I hired the descendants of the original builders, whenever I could find them, to build this house. And all the materials that I had to build new contained pieces of the old house. My house is more of our old house by volume and by distribution than your house that used the big pieces. I have built our family home, but you're welcome to come and move with me." When they finally got to the third brother's home, the two older brothers stopped, stared, and laughed. The youngest brother even smiled too. He said, I know, it doesn't look a lot like the old house. Definitely not nearly as close as your houses. But I didn't try to build the old house exactly, at least not in appearance. I thought about what the old house had felt like, and I decided to build a new house. Now, it's on the exact same site, the old foundation. It was solid, it was great. Our ancestor knew what he was doing. But I built up on that with new materials, new techniques. I think our ancestor would have used those if they were available. And I went with my memories and those of our neighbors, thinking about how the house felt especially when it was brand new, and how it was loved by those who lived there. I wanted to capture that same feeling. I think I've succeeded. You know, even better, this new house is much more comfortable than the old one. It doesn't cost a fortune to heat or cool. The toilets flush every time. I don't stub my toes on a loose stair or floorboard. And the ceilings are the proper height. I mean, people were shorter back then. That proves it. I think I like this house better. It's safer, it's more comfortable, it's stronger. This house is not going to blow over in another storm, I can tell you that. And it'll probably last twice as long as the old one. The other two brothers just shook their heads in disgust. They accused the younger brother of being a traitor to the memory of the family and their family home. But they had to admit he never claimed that he had built the old family house or that he owned the true house. They went back to their respective houses, still arguing about whose was better and whose was the true house. The third brother remained in his home, happy with what he had made. So now I ask you, which brother owned the family home? The first brother, who had built a house that looked precisely like the old house, down to the smallest detail. The second brother, who had built a house that was structurally identical to the first, that contained more of the old house within its framework? Or was it the third brother, who built a house that looked less the same, but felt like the old house had felt, that was built on the same foundation, in the same place, and was a house he could live in comfort and joy? Thank you for listening.